Okay, so I've read book 8, which in my edition is called The Songs of a Poet. And I thought I'd just check in here because it's quite an interesting little section. Um, and essentially, it's some sort of celebrations and some feasting before Odysseus is going to go on his journey. And it's really going to set up the situation, I think, for Odysseus kind of filling in the blanks of what's happened to him. Because, the first thing we've heard about him has really been when he's been on Calypso's island, and that's 7 years in to his journey home. And so we don't really know what's happened in these years prior to turning up on Calypso's island. So I think he's going to be filling in the blanks soon about his adventures. And the structuring here is cool. There's three instances of the poet Demodocus, a blind poet who sort of mirrors Homer himself. Um, he's singing these three songs, and the first one is about the Trojan War, and Odysseus starts crying. So they go off and do something else. They do some sports and throw the discus and all of that. And then they sing another song, and it's much happier, much sillier, and everyone has a great time. And then they have a feast, and they have another song, and it's another song about Troy. And again, Odysseus starts crying. And this leads everyone to ask, who are you? Why are you crying? Who have you lost in the Trojan Wars? And I think that's going to then set up Odysseus' story and tell them how he came to be with them, how he came to be shipwrecked. So yeah, it sounds like it's going to be an interesting structural device. But I thought it'd be cool just to note how Odysseus reacts to these poems. And with him crying this much, he's crying uncontrollably. It kind of describes like a wife who's lost a husband, whose husband has been killed right in front of her. Is the sort of the simile that Homer uses. So he's definitely either really guilty, feeling this deep guilt, or he has maybe post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that. But that it's just cool to see that well, not cool. It's sad, but it's interesting to see that the Trojan War has had quite a deep and profound effect on him. Okay, so I finished the Odyssey earlier today. I think I raced through the second half quite quickly. Yeah, I think where I left you off, Odysseus is with the Phaeacians, and they've asked him to explain why he's crying, to tell his story, and to fill in what's happened. And really, it's just a very quick, fast-paced, sweeping narrative, really, of what's happened to Odysseus and his crew up until the shipwreck at Calypso's island, and really explaining how and why that happened. And then they end up on the island of the Cyclopses, and there's the famous story of the Cyclops that kind of locks them in his cave, and then they blind him and escape. And that's kind of setting up the why they were shipwrecked and why things have gone awry. And then there are just sort of numerous other little adventures. They end up stuck on Circe's island, and there are things they have to do to escape, and places they have to go to get answers. They have to go to the underworld and then come back. So just a quick note on the underworld. I found it quite cool looking at the map to see that the underworld is put over in the west. So kind of the opening of the Mediterranean to the rest of the Atlantic. And I just found it quite cool that it was in the west and that it was following the course of the sun, which is quite a cool poetic idea that in a way all of our lives are constantly heading west with the sun, and that's just the way that the planet is turning and moving, and that's the direction of all our lives, and we're all heading west in a way. So I thought that was quite cool, that was just kind of subtly in there and just hinted in the geography, but not stressed too much. But yeah, back to the main conversation. Yeah, it never feels convoluted. I think that this is the most sort of fast-paced, sort of adventure-filled section. This is where all the stories from the Odyssey that we think of, really come from. And yeah, they're kind of over, quite quickly after. I don't know how many sort of books, how many little sections there are, but yeah, it's really, really quick. And it's really just filling in the blanks, because really, as far as the actual story of the Odyssey is involved, it's more about the situation at home and about him trying to get back. But yeah, and then eventually he gets help getting back, and then he's just basically testing the people back at home to see how they would treat him if they didn't know who he was, which again is interesting. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'll save my thoughts on the work as a whole for a little bit. First off, I think I'll just share with you another little journey, a little walk I took up a hill, and yeah, it'll be a nice change of pace. You don't have to sit looking at me for a while, so this will be a nice little walk, and then once I'm back home, I'll talk about the poem as a whole. Okay. Well, I think this is where I turn around. Okay, so the Odyssey as a whole. So yeah, generally I really enjoyed it. As I was saying earlier, sort of the devices, the storytelling devices in there, I found really interesting, quite captivating, particularly when Odysseus himself is telling his story. Um, Maybe the bit at the end with Odysseus on Ithaca, testing everybody, trying to see what the suitors are like, kind of riling up the suitors just to get them a bit angry and annoyed. I found a little bit tedious after a while, just because it felt like it was just kind of bobbing around and not really doing anything for quite a while. Um, all the time, Odysseus in that bit is kind of scheming and thinking, and it keeps reminding you that, but it's not really going into much detail as to what the different options that he's laying out. That you don't get any of that. It just tells you he was scheming. Yeah, that wasn't as interesting as I'd hoped. But yeah, particularly the bit with Odysseus telling his story with all the shipwrecks and disasters. I loved that. And I did find the very end quite interesting. And that kind of got me thinking, because earlier at the very beginning I'd picked up from the introduction that obviously hospitality is a very important part of the story and the world of this story. How to be a good guest, how to be a good host, and I could definitely see all the way through how each situation, each place that Odysseus goes, each person Odysseus meets, is some kind of test in that respect. Whether seeing whether or not Odysseus is being a good guest or whether the host is being a good host. And we see that again in Ithaca with the suitors, and part of why Odysseus is so harsh with the suitors maybe is because they're not living up to the right standards as guests. They're taking the host for granted, and they're kind of taking advantage of their hosts. So that's definitely one way to look at it, and it's very fascinating the more you look into that. And another thing I found, I think particularly at the end, is just in the way that it's kind of about how times are changing, how as human beings we have to adapt to our surroundings and our situations. And really for Odysseus, I think this whole adventure really is one long learning curve. And you get to almost the very end, and it seems like Odysseus hasn't learned anything. He's still in his head in a way. He's still back at Troy, or he's still at that stage just after he's left Troy, and he's pillaging and just trying to grab as much wealth as he can and slaughter as many people as he can. And I think it gets to a point where the gods themselves are a bit fed up of all of the fighting, and if you don't like spoilers, sorry. It basically ends with the gods telling Odysseus, okay, it's time to stop fighting. You have to make friends with these people who maybe don't like you that much. You have to learn to make peace and to work together. And it does end there quite abruptly. It would have been nice to maybe have a bit of a meditation on what it is to make peace with people, even if both sides have kind of wronged each other. But yeah, it's still a nice note to end on, and it's interesting that in some ways Odysseus has come a long way, and yet at the end maybe he's only just learning this lesson that it's taken like 20 years for him to learn. So yeah, that was definitely pretty interesting. So yeah, on the whole, it's good. It's a good read. Emily Wilson's translation is, on the whole, very, very good. Not that I'm any standard to go by. I'm not an expert, but yeah, I think she does the job well. It doesn't feel like there's anything getting in the way between you and the story. But also it's kind of slightly elevated, but it's not patronizing, if that makes sense. So it kind of has that poetic storyteller kind of vibe to it, but still feels quite direct. So yeah, it's a fun read. I'm very, very glad that I read this translation, and yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'll read another translation in the future. But there we go. We've reached the end of my Odyssey Odyssey, and yeah, I've come to the Sound, back to the harbour, back home, and I think luckily everything at home looks to be in order. But okay, there we go. I hope you enjoyed that. I don't know how this worked as a vlog. I might get a bit smoother at it all as I go on in the future. But I hope you're doing well. Thank you very much for watching if you got this far, and I'll see you again soon. Alright, bye.